Well, there's been some logging going on there, hasn't there? Look at that. Just outside of Cross Reservoir. And last time I was here, which wasn't that long ago, this was all forestry. Now look at it. Well, I suppose if it's been done on a sustainable basis and those logs are to become constructional materials of some description going forward, then well and good. I'm a bit of a woodworker myself. I make early musical instruments, flutes mainly, and I've recently recommissioned my workshop. But a few years ago I was quite successful. I could sell my handcrafted instruments right across the globe at one point. I bet you didn't expect that, did you? Yeah, so anyway, welcome back. Here I am on my beautiful little Royal Enfield Classic 350, the bike that everybody loves. Even the most passionate motorcycle hating car drivers find that their frosty attitude just melts a little bit when they see a bike like this, because she's a little beauty and she wouldn't harm anybody. Would you, old lass? Now, God, the last 3-4 weeks it's just rained every day here in Blighty, here in the UK, whereas in large swathes of mainland Europe and Asia and the southwestern United States, it's been dangerously hot. That said, there was an interesting article on one of the news channels this morning to the effect that way more people die as a consequence of cold than as a consequence of heat, and that actually the warmer it gets, the fewer people perish as a consequence of temperature. All very interesting stuff. Makes you think, doesn't it? Now then, I've waxed lyrical on this channel on more than one occasion about things that I consider were better in the past than they are today. And not necessarily just within my living memory, although that goes back a significant number of years. But you know, perhaps even a bit further back than that, maybe even pre-war. And you know, a lot of things were a lot better, and some things weren't, of course. But one thing that really has galled me a late is the conduct of our water companies here in England. In Scotland, Scottish Water is publicly owned, but here in England, back in 1989, the Thatcher government decided, on a purely ideological basis, absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the welfare of the nation, on a purely ideological stroke, make your mates a lot richer stroke, line my own pockets ideology, decided to sell off all the water companies. And what happened was, all the water companies, and up here it'd be Yorkshire Water, which is massive, all the water companies were sold off without any debt. So the government cleared all the debt and sold off the water companies. And many of them, if not most of them, over time, then became owned by foreign hedge funds, for example. In fact, the latest water company to absolutely disgrace itself in this country, nearly go bankrupt, Thames Water, which is the biggest in terms of the population. They were previously owned by an Australian company that just ran it into the ground, basically, and then flogged it off. So before we get into the detail, we need to consider this, don't we? Water is the staff of life. Isn't that from the Bible? Water is the staff of life. Without water, virtually no living thing on this planet can exist. So it is a sacred, holy, precious thing, water. And we just can't function without it, basically. So I have to ask myself, what the hell were they thinking of when they gave it over to greedy, grabbing, corrupt, profit-making, for their own benefit, private companies? What were they thinking of? This is water, right? It's not bloody groceries or DIY materials or other commodities, if you like, that we can with a little bit of effort do without. It's water. So yeah, so the government in 1989 sold them all off, cleared all the debt, and since then in England and Wales the water companies have, wait for it, creamed off no less than 74 billion, that's 74 billion pounds a profit. And that, all of that money, all of that 74 billion has gone to the shareholders. And the investment and reinvestment into the infrastructure that supports the provision of water and sewerage, both of which are vital to public health, very little indeed. So 74 billion to shareholders, a massive amount to their executive boards and chief executives, and next to diddly squat into the infrastructure that supports the provision of that utility. And so lo and behold, of course, over the years, the resilience of that infrastructure has deteriorated, and as a result, when the weather takes a turn for the worse, as it regularly does here in the United Kingdom, and there's flooding and excess precipitation and the rest of it, the sewerage system cannot cope, and so the water companies just illegally, criminally pump raw sewage into our rivers, coastlines and lakes, and end up getting fined for it. But of course they're paying themselves so much money by creaming off all of these profits and by running up billions and billions and billions of pounds worth of debt at the same time. It's just worth it to pay the fine. Yeah, but I think there is a place in society for these executive boards, chief execs and what have you that have been doing this. There is a place in society for people like that. It's called prison, because that's where they should be. Because in any other walk of life where you deliberately inflicted that amount of damage and potential serious impact on public health, you would be in prison. Absolutely bloody criminal, no two ways about it. Greed, pure unadulterated criminal greed and corruption by the water companies. And of course, as motorcyclists, we love to ride through the countryside and look at the reservoirs and lakes and rivers and ride to the coast, and these people have been systematically destroying these natural features and the wildlife that they support because of their profligate corporate greed. And we've just sat back and let it happen. Sat back and let it happen over the years. And when it transpires, other things that water companies have been doing, bearing in mind that is it Southern Water that currently have a hosepipe ban when it's been pissing down every day for a month? Got a hosepipe ban. But it transpires water companies also, what they've been doing since they acquired all of this infrastructure from the government at bargain basement prices, debt free, is they've been selling off a lot of the reservoirs to land developers to build on. And you'll know as well as I do that reservoirs are not by and large to be found in urban areas. They are all in beautiful rural areas like this, and so you can pretty much guarantee that the property that these property builders have been building on this land that's been flogged off to them cheap by the water companies because they didn't give two tosses about the reservoirs they were getting rid of. You can guarantee that that wouldn't be affordable housing for normal working people, would it, out in places like this? No. So yeah, so another thing the water companies have been doing over the years is they've been running up billions and billions of pounds worth of debt. They've been neglecting the infrastructure completely, paying foreign shareholders masses of money, paying themselves masses of money, putting very little into improving the quality of service, selling off the reservoirs to property developers so they can build big houses in beautiful areas for rich folk. So that's that in a nutshell. Absolutely bloody criminal. And I am not making a political point here, I'm just making a statement of regrettable fact about how uncontrolled greed has been allowed to destroy our water industry, among others. I'm just talking about water today. If we're to talk about everything else, it'd be a 6-hour video minimum. So that's that. So you might think, well, there's a body called Ofwat here in England that's the regulator. Ofwat regulates the water companies. It's supposed to stop them misbehaving. But it transpired done very little really. The fines that the water companies have got for basically pumping tons of human shit into our waterways, they've been largely levied by the Environment Agency. But Ofwat been doing very little, frankly, about this. But then it transpires, of course, that a lot of senior executives that work for Ofwat end up with senior positions in the private water companies, earning a lot more money. Because you don't get paid a right lot of money working for a regulator, public body. Nobody ever gets rich in public service, I can testify to that. You do it for a different reason. But of course, if as somebody in charge of the body that regulates the conduct of the water companies, if you are harbouring realistic expectations of securing a much better paid job with much better terms and conditions with said water companies going forward, you're not really going to pull your finger out to make them have it, are you? So the whole system is absolutely bent from start to finish. Now, I thought there was some light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm not going to get overly political here, because I'll go on record. I have gone on record as saying there ain't a mainstream political party in this country that represents me anymore at all. But I thought there was some light at the end of the tunnel when Sir Keir Starmer, during his election campaign to become leader of the Labour Party, made a load of pledges. And one of those pledges was to bring the critical infrastructure of this country back into public ownership, and it's probably been the single biggest, most popular political policy, if you look at the opinion polls across the board, that there's been in recent times. Lots and lots and lots of support for it, right across the spectrum of Tory voters, Labour voters, Lib Dems, all the rest of it. But no sooner had he got elected as leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, all of those policies that people really liked, he chucked them out the window. Not doing it anymore. And the pathetic excuse he gave for it was, oh well, the economy's in such a bad state we can't afford to bring these organisations back into public ownership. Well, I've got news for you, Keir. We're not swallowing that load of old bullshit, because we know that all of these utilities, water, energy, railway, postal services, the rest of it, they're all revenue positive from day one. So day one that you bring them back, you're not purchasing a liability, you're purchasing something that from day one generates you a lot of income. So don't be telling me therefore that we can't afford it, because we absolutely can afford it. But that's just an excuse, and if you ask me, it's because just like their Tory counterparts, they're in the pockets of the big corporate organisations. And of course, as we all know, Just like with Ofwat and the water companies, we all know that politicians, when they finish their political careers, many of them, particularly the more senior ones, go on to get plum positions with big private corporate organisations, don't they? So I suspect that's exactly why we can't see daylight between the policies of the two mainstream parties in this country anymore. And I just ask myself, who represents me now? There's nobody. We don't have proportional representation. You're basically going to get a Tory government or a Labour government, and I can't tell the bloody difference between either of them now. And you know, the only light that there was at the end of the tunnel when Starmer was articulating these policies during his leadership campaign have all been sold down the river, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful. And I don't believe all these arguments around the fact that it's, you know, they've got to be fiscally responsible and they've got to get in power and it'll be different when they get in power. I think the sole motivation is historically what that motivation has always been. In other words, let's not alienate the corporate classes, because we might need a job with them when we move out of politics, and that's it in a nutshell. Anyway, I'm just going to have a little break here, and then I'm going to take you on a ride and show you something that represents when things like the provision of water in this company was something to be proud of. So, speak to you in a bit. So there we are, the Nid Valley from Scarhouse Reservoir. But take a look at this for a piece of 1920s engineering. The reservoir itself, quite something. Yeah, so you see, at a time when so much greed and selfishness seems to define our day-to-day existence, and we look at the behaviour of the water companies now in the 21st century, the amount of money that's been taken out of supporting the infrastructure and the standard of service to the public, to the bill paying public, and the amount of private pockets that have been lined, mainly abroad, since 1989. £74 billion creamed off and handed to foreign shareholders, or a lot of it to foreign shareholders. Imagine what it would have looked like if even a fraction of that 74 billion had been invested in the sewage systems and the waterways, and keeping clean and thriving the rivers and lakes and coasts of England. It's heartbreaking. But when you look at a place like this that was built in the 1920s and early 1930s, you know, we are reminded of a better time when more more principled approaches were taken to providing facilities like this, essential life-giving facilities like this, but they were generally done for the greater good of the population. And of course a whole village became established here over the 10 years or so that it took to build Scar House Reservoir. The Scar House here, and then further on there, just over the hillside, there's Angram Reservoir. They're basically next door to each other. And yeah, a whole village with shops and educational facilities and all the rest of it was actually built here for the men. It was men who built this magnificent structure. It's really impressive, but more than that, it's a reminder that with the right will and the right motives, you can achieve an awful lot without necessarily making so many people so ridiculously and unnecessarily wealthy. Not wrong with having a bob or two, but there are so many extremes now, and the polarisation in the distribution of wealth is just frankly obscene. And we all know it, don't we? We all know we've been losing money, and of course the political elites and the corporate elites have been making vast amounts of money, and of course use that then to try and control our lives. And there's got to be a day of reckoning. But it's good to come up here and just be reminded of better times. You know, even in the 1920s and 30s, that weren't noted for the shall we say, the social mobility of the working classes, or the emancipation of the working classes, or gender equality. Certainly not. But even back then, with all of that ingrained, almost colonial prejudice, we still had the wherewithal to build a magnificent structure like this for the benefit of the broader community. And that makes you think. It's awesome. Well, I hope that was of some interest to you. Maybe a little bit controversial in some circles, but I think most people would fully appreciate that we don't live in the fairest and most equitable of times, and probably at the root of just about everything that ails our 21st century society is the lust for power and greed. It's pretty depressing, really, albeit that most people, I suppose the likes of you and me, are not in a position to even entertain such aspirations, noble or otherwise. You just got to crack on with life and hope they don't try and screw too much out of us and take away too many of our freedoms. Behind every agenda there is motive, and whenever a decision is made that affects or compromises your life, there's only one question to be asked, really, and that is, who benefits? And if you look at any given set of circumstances and always ask that question, who benefits, you'll probably find your answer. It's not good. Anyway, on that note, time for a bit of sustenance. Hope that's been of some interest to you. And in the meantime, ride safe, be kind, and I'll catch you soon. Toodle pip. Oh, you're a handsome fella, aren't you? There you go. You're welcome.